There's a ticking time bomb inside you, right now. As you watch this video, Jung figured this out back in 1921. Huberman confirmed it in 2024. And if you're one of those people who avoids conflict at all costs, who swallows down emotions in silence, who prefers to keep the peace even when you're being destroyed on the inside, then that bomb is already armed. The question isn't if it will explode. The question is when, and where, and on whom. Because here's the brutal truth no one wants to tell you. The more you avoid conflict, the more devastating the explosion will be when it finally comes, and it always comes. I'm not just saying this. Jung mapped out this mechanism over 100 years ago. He called it the shadow self. He wrote that everything you repress doesn't just disappear. It goes into the unconscious and there in the dark, without the light of awareness. These repressed emotions don't die. They grow, they feed, they gain autonomous strength, and modern neuroscience, especially the work of Andrew Huberman at the Huberman Lab, has validated this at a cellular level, showing exactly what happens in your brain when you suppress emotions repeatedly. The circuit between your amygdala and your prefrontal cortex literally degrades, and when that circuit fails, you explode. Not on the person who deserved the explosion, on whoever was just there at the wrong time. It could be your child, it could be your partner, it could be a complete stranger in traffic. It's never who caused the original pressure. And that's the cruel cycle that Jung predicted, and Huberman proved. But before we continue, I need to show you something that few experts talk about. There's a crucial difference between avoiding conflict out of fear and choosing your battles with wisdom. Emotionally mature people sometimes choose not to engage in conflict, but they do so consciously, knowing that they have the option to engage, choosing not to. For strategic reasons, not out of fear. Conflict avoiders don't have that choice. They simply cannot engage in conflict. The fear is automatic, the repression is involuntary, the escape is compulsive, and that difference is fundamental. Because choosing not to conflict is a position of strength. Being incapable of conflict is a position of weakness, and weakness accumulates pressure. Jung talked about this when he described the difference between the conscious individual and the unconscious individual. The conscious individual knows their shadow self, knows they have the capacity for anger, for aggression, for confrontation, and chooses when and how to use it. The unconscious individual denies their shadow self, pretends they have no anger, believes they're only ever peaceful, until the shadow erupts and proves otherwise. Which one do you want to be? The difference between the two isn't having or not having anger, it's knowing or not knowing that you have it. If you've ever exploded on someone who didn't deserve it, if you've ever regretted words that came out of your mouth uncontrollably, if you've ever wondered where that disproportionate rage came from, then this video is going to give you answers that you've never found anywhere else, because what I'm about to reveal now connects deep psychology with cutting-edge neuroscience, in a way that few YouTube channels have the courage to do. Let's begin. The first concept you need to understand is what Jung called shadow pressure. Jung spent decades studying patients who were considered calm, peaceful people, who never argued, who always gave in. And he noticed a disturbing pattern. These people were the ones who most frequently ended up in psychological breakdowns. Not the chronic explosives, the chronic repressors. Why? Because Jung understood something fundamental about the human psyche. It operates by balance, and when you consistently repress a part of yourself, especially emotions like anger, frustration, legitimate indignation, the psyche creates what he called counter-pressure, and that counter-pressure is autonomous. That means it acts on its own, independent of your conscious will. Jung wrote in Iron in 1951, "The shadow is that hidden, repressed, for the most part inferior and guilt-laden personality." Personality, not emotion. Personality. He's saying that your repressed anger doesn't just sit there waiting, it organizes itself, gains structure, develops its own will, and when it gains enough strength, it erupts, usually at the worst possible moment, usually on the people who least deserve it. usually with an intensity completely disproportionate to the immediate trigger. How many times have you seen this happen? Maybe in yourself? A silly argument about dishes in the sink that turns into a war. An innocent comment from a colleague that sparks a murderous rage. A child spilling a glass of milk, and you screaming like it's the end of the world. It's not craziness. It's the shadow erupting. It's the accumulation of 1,000 avoided conflicts, exploding in a single moment. Now here comes the neuroscientific validation that Jung never had access to. In October of 2024, Huberman brought Dr. Bill Eddy onto his podcast. Eddy is a lawyer, therapist, and expert in high-conflict personalities, and he said something that confirmed everything that Jung had mapped out. He said, "Many people don't understand how high-conflict emotions are contagious." Contagious. When you repress your own anger repeatedly, you're not just keeping it inside, you're allowing it to ferment. And fermented emotions are toxic, but there's more. Neuroimaging studies from 2024 and 2025 have shown something even more alarming. When researchers temporarily suppressed the activity of the prefrontal cortex in test subjects, they discovered that these people lost the ability to control emotional impulses, the amygdala. That primitive region of the brain responsible for automatic emotional reactions became hyperactive. Now think about this with me. When you avoid conflict repeatedly, what are you doing to your prefrontal cortex? You're overloading it, because every time you swallow down emotions, every time you bite your tongue, every time you smile when you want to scream, your prefrontal cortex has to work overtime to suppress the natural response of the amygdala. And overloaded systems fail, and that's exactly what the neuroscience of 2025 is showing. The circuit between the prefrontal cortex and the amygdala can degrade with excessive use of emotional suppression, and when it degrades, you lose the brakes. And when you lose the brakes, the amygdala takes over. And when the amygdala takes over, you explode, without warning, without control, without proportionality. Jung called this the eruption of the shadow self. Huberman would call it the failure of the inhibitory circuit. They're different names for the same devastating phenomenon, but hold on, because what I'm about to reveal now is going to completely change how you understand this pattern. Jung didn't stop at the diagnosis. He went deeper. He discovered that there's a real reason why certain people become chronic conflict avoiders, and that reason is buried deep within their shadow self. Most conflict avoiders weren't born that way. They were shaped that way, usually by environments where conflict was dangerous, where expressing anger brought punishment, where disagreeing meant losing love or approval. Children who grow up in homes where emotional expression is punished learn a fundamental lesson. My anger is dangerous, and my feelings are problematic, and I need to control myself to be loved and accepted. And what happens to that natural anger? It goes into the shadow self, and there, it grows for years, for decades, until the pressure cooker can't take it anymore. Carl Jung called this process defensive repression, and he warned, what you repress doesn't disappear. It acquires autonomous power in the unconscious. Want to know the most ironic thing? The people who most avoid conflict are often the ones who cause the most destructive conflicts, not because they're bad people, but because when they finally snap, all the accumulated anger of years comes out at once, and no one is prepared. Not the victim, not even the avoider themselves. A study cited by Dr. Bill Eddy in his conversation with Dr. Huberman revealed something fascinating. People prone to high conflict frequently alternate between two states, total suppression and total explosion. There's no middle ground. And the most disturbing thing? These people generally don't recognize themselves as problematic because they see themselves as peacemakers, as people who avoid conflict, as the emotionally mature adults in the room, until they blow up. And then they see themselves as victims of provocation, never as the ticking time bomb that was waiting to explode. If this is resonating strongly with you right now, if you're starting to recognize this pattern in your own life, stick with me, because the next part will reveal exactly how this cycle perpetuates itself and how to break it. But first, I need to show you something that will completely change how you understand your relationships. Dr. Bill Eddy, in his conversation with Dr. Huberman, revealed something crucial about high-conflict individuals. He said that most high-conflict people don't see themselves that way. They see themselves as victims, as people who are reacting to provocations from others, never as the source of the problem. And that's exactly what Carl Jung described about projection. When you project your shadow self onto someone, you genuinely believe that the problem is the other person. You're not lying. You genuinely can't see that the source is within you. Because projection distorts perception. And the scariest thing that Carl Jung discovered about projection? It's involuntary. You don't choose to project. It simply happens, automatically, outside of your conscious control. The only way to stop projecting is to bring the shadow self into consciousness, to recognize that there's something within you that you're projecting onto another person, and that requires a courage that most people don't have, the courage to look inside instead of pointing outside, the courage to ask, could the problem be me? The courage to consider that maybe your perception is distorted. That's shadow self-integration in action. And it's the only antidote to the cycle of explosions. There's a concept that Carl Jung developed called projection, and it's crucial for understanding why conflict avoiders choose specific targets for their explosions. When you repress something, Jung discovered, you tend to project it onto other people. Your repressed anger doesn't just stay bottled up. It projects outward, and you start seeing anger in places where it might not even exist. Your partner's tone of voice sounds aggressive when it isn't. Your colleague's glance seems provocative when it's actually neutral. Your child's behavior seems disrespectful when it's just childish. And this perception, distorted by projection, creates a vicious cycle. You project anger onto the other person. You react to that projected anger. The other person reacts to your reaction. And now there is real conflict. But you didn't cause it. You provoked the provocation. And that's the most insidious pattern that Carl Jung identified in conflict avoiders. They frequently create the conflicts they claim to want to avoid, not consciously, unconsciously, through the projection of the shadow self. Dr. Huberman adds a neuroscientific layer to this. When your amygdala is chronically activated by suppressed emotions, it starts to see threats where they don't exist. This is called emotional hypervigilance, and it's measurable. Neuroimaging studies show that people with a high level of repressed emotions have amygdalas that respond more strongly to neutral stimuli. Neutral faces seem hostile. Neutral tones sound aggressive. Neutral silence feels punitive. And then you react. And the other person doesn't understand. And you feel even more misunderstood. And the pressure increases. And the cycle continues until the next explosion. Let me give you a concrete example of how this works in real life. Imagine a woman named Emily. She's known by everyone as the most easygoing person in the office, never complains, never disagrees, always smiles, always says yes. What no one sees is what's happening inside her. Every time the boss takes credit for her work, she swallows it down. Every time a colleague makes passive-aggressive comments, she smiles. Every time they ask her to stay late without compensation, she agrees. On the outside, peace. On the inside, pressure building. One day, after months of this, her husband forgets to pick up milk on the way home. Milk. And Emily explodes, screams, cries, says terrible things. Things that have nothing to do with milk. The husband doesn't understand. She doesn't understand. But now you understand. That explosion wasn't about milk. It was about months of accumulated anger at work, months of avoided conflicts, months of pressure that needed to come out somewhere. And it came out on her husband, who had nothing to do with anything. This is what Carl Jung called shadow self-displacement. The anger goes to the wrong target, always. And Dr. Huberman explained the neurological mechanism behind it. When the amygdala finally overloads the prefrontal cortex, it doesn't distinguish between targets. It simply fires at the first available stimulus, whoever it may be. And that's why explosions from conflict avoiders are so confusing for those who receive them. Because the recipient didn't do anything proportional to the explosion. The explosion came from somewhere else, from years of somewhere else. Now I'm going to tell you something that Carl Jung wrote that changed my life when I read it for the first time. He said, "What you resist persists." 5 words that sum up everything we're discussing. Every conflict you avoid doesn't disappear. It persists in your unconscious. It's in your shadow self, and it's in your nervous system. And the more you resist it, the more it persists, the more you avoid it, the more it grows, until resisting becomes impossible. And then, instead of a small, healthy conflict that could have been resolved in 5 minutes, you have a catastrophic eruption that can destroy entire relationships. Neuroscience confirms this on a hormonal level. Every time you swallow down emotions, every time you suppress a legitimate emotional response, your body releases cortisol. That cortisol has nowhere to go, because you haven't expressed the emotion. So, it accumulates. And chronic cortisol does terrible things to the brain. It degrades the prefrontal cortex connection. It hypertrophies the amygdala. It impairs memory. It increases anxiety. And it creates a body that's perpetually in fight or flight mode, even when there's no real threat. That's the biological price of avoiding conflict. And no one told you this, until now. But there's a way out. And Jung mapped it too. He called it shadow self-integration, and it's not as complicated as it sounds. Shadow self-integration starts with a simple decision. Stop pretending you don't have anger, because you do. Everyone does. Anger is a basic human emotion. It exists for an evolutionary reason. It signals when your boundaries have been violated, when something unfair has happened, when you need to protect yourself. Repressing that anger doesn't make you a better person. It turns you into a walking time bomb. Jung proposed a process he called confronting the shadow self. And it works like this. First, you recognize that the shadow self exists, that you have anger, that you have resentment, that you have desires for confrontation that you constantly repress. Second, you observe when those feelings appear, without judgment, without trying to suppress them, just observe. Third, you create safe spaces to express those emotions. It could be a journal, it could be therapy, it could be an honest conversation with someone you trust. Fourth, you start to practice healthy conflict, small disagreements, small no's, small expressions of boundaries. And this is going to feel uncomfortable at first, because you've spent your whole life avoiding it. But it's exactly that discomfort that prevents the future eruption. Think of it as muscle training. If you never lift weights, your muscles atrophy. And when one day you need to lift something heavy, you get injured. The same thing happens with conflict. If you never practice small conflict, your ability to deal with conflict atrophies. And when one day you face a big conflict, you explode, or get hurt, or hurt someone else. Jung understood this intuitively. Huberman has proven it scientifically. Neuroplasticity shows that skills you don't use are lost. And dealing with conflict is a skill. It needs to be exercised. Every time you avoid a small conflict, you're losing the opportunity to train your brain to handle conflict in a healthy way. And when the inevitable conflict arrives, and it always does, you're not prepared. Huberman adds specific protocols for this. He talks about what he calls bottom-up emotional regulation. Instead of trying to control emotions with thinking, work with the body first. Physiological breathing, exercise, cold exposure. Techniques that regulate the nervous system before it enters explosion mode. Let me explain a specific technique that Huberman detailed. Physiological breathing works like this. You inhale through your nose twice in a row, a long inhale followed by a short one, and then exhale slowly through your mouth. This activates the parasympathetic nervous system immediately. And what does that mean in practice? It means that when you feel the pressure rising, when you feel like you're about to explode, You can use this technique to deactivate the fight or flight response before it takes over. It's not suppressing the emotion, it's giving it a controlled release valve. Jung would say you're creating a space between the stimulus and the reaction, a space where consciousness can enter. Huberman would say you're giving the prefrontal cortex time to reassume control before the amygdala fires. They're different descriptions of the same process, and it works. But there's one condition. You need to practice when you're calm to be able to use it when you're in crisis. If you've never practiced this technique, you won't be able to remember it in the moment of the eruption. The amygdala won't let you. So, daily practice is not optional. It's the only way to have this tool available when you need it most. But most importantly, and Huberman agrees with Jung on this, it's to not wait until the pressure is unbearable, but to release small amounts of steam regularly, through small conflicts, through honest expressions, through clear boundaries, through no's said at the right time. You've just discovered something that most people go their whole lives without understanding. That avoiding conflict isn't peace, it's accumulating war. That suppressing anger isn't maturity, it's arming a bomb. That exploding on those who don't deserve it isn't a momentary lapse of control. It's the predictable result of years of repression. Jung saw this in his practice for decades. Huberman validated this in the lab in 2024. And now, you know. If this video revealed something important to you, if it helped you understand a pattern that was destroying your life without you knowing, consider leaving a super thanks. Every support allows me to continue bringing these deep connections between Jung and modern neuroscience. Connections that few YouTube channels have the courage to make. Connections that can literally change how you live. The golden heart down there isn't just financial support. It's you saying, like, continue revealing what's hidden. It's you becoming part of a community that seeks truth, not comfort. Now, before I finish, I need to tell you the most important part. There's a simple test to know if you're accumulating dangerous pressure. Ask yourself, when was the last time I said no to someone important in my life? When was the last time I expressed honest disagreement? When was the last time I maintained a boundary, even when it created discomfort? If you can't remember, the bomb is already armed, and the longer you wait, the bigger the explosion will be. Shadow self-integration isn't a one-time event. It's a daily practice. Every small conflict you face with honesty is a release valve. Every boundary you maintain is pressure released. Every no you say at the right time is a future explosion avoided. Let me tell you about a fascinating study that was published recently. There's a ticking time bomb inside you right now, as you watch this video. This isn't just some abstract idea, it's a real phenomenon with serious consequences. We're going to explore how suppressing your emotions, particularly if you're someone who avoids conflict at all costs, can lead to devastating outbursts. Drawing upon the insights of Carl Jung and the neuroscientific validation of Andrew Huberman, we'll uncover the mechanics of this emotional time bomb and how to defuse it. Researchers followed individuals who described themselves as conflict avoidant for a period of 5 years. What they discovered was surprising. These individuals had significantly higher rates of cardiovascular problems, anxiety disorders, and depression. Not just slightly higher, significantly higher. The body keeps the score. Every conflict avoided doesn't just disappear. It transforms into cortisol, into inflammation, into disease. Jung didn't have access to this medical data, but he knew intuitively that repressing emotions had a cost. He wrote that neuroses are the suffering of the soul that has not found its meaning. And avoided conflicts are exactly that, suffering that hasn't found expression. That's been trapped. That's turned into disease. Huberman expanded on this, showing the precise biological mechanisms. Chronic cortisol degrades the hippocampus, hypertrophies the amygdala, impairs the immune system, and increases the risk of autoimmune diseases. All because you didn't want to have an uncomfortable conversation, or because you preferred a false peace. The price is real, and it's high. And the only way to avoid paying that price is to start facing the small conflicts before they become big diseases, and Jung knew this, and Huberman has proven it. And now you have a choice. Continue avoiding, and wait for the explosion, or start integrating, and create true peace, not the false peace of the avoider, the real peace of someone who doesn't have a bomb about to explode. There's one last thing I need to share with you before we wrap up. Jung talked about something he called the transcendent function. It's the psyche's ability to find balance between opposites, between the light and the shadow self, between expression and repression, between conflict and peace. The emotionally mature person, according to Jung, isn't someone who never feels anger. It's someone who has integrated their anger, who knows it, who knows when it appears, and who consciously chooses how to express it. It's not absence of conflict. It's mastery over conflict. Huberman would call this optimized emotional regulation, the capacity to feel intense emotions without being overwhelmed by them, to recognize anger without acting impulsively, to express disagreement without destroying relationships. This doesn't come from avoiding conflict. It comes from practicing them, consciously, intentionally, frequently, until your nervous system learns that conflict isn't a threat. It's part of life, it's part of growth, and it's part of being human. In the comments, tell me, did you recognize yourself in this pattern? Have you ever snapped at someone who didn't deserve it after bottling things up for too long? Or are you on the team that thinks avoiding conflicts is always the best option? Write it down below, because your story might help someone who's going through the same thing, and because it helps me understand what you need in future videos. If you've made it this far, you're part of a rare group, people who seek truth about themselves, even when that truth is uncomfortable. Jung said that only by facing our darkness can we find our light. Huberman would say that only by understanding our neurobiology can we optimize it. They're both right, and they're both telling you the same thing. Stop avoiding. Start integrating, before it's too late, because the bomb doesn't wait for you to be ready. It explodes when you least expect it. And the shards are always harder to put back together than the original conflict would have been to resolve. Jung spent his entire life trying to show us this. Huberman is using every tool of modern neuroscience to confirm it. The message is clear, Sai. The evidence is irrefutable. The choice is yours. Until the next video, where we'll continue connecting the profound wisdom of Jung with the cutting-edge science of Huberman, so that you finally understand what's happening inside you and can do something about it.